50 years of independence. It was the 1st of October 1960 when Nigeria first gained independence, and since then we've seen a lot of challenges, but we've also seen a lot of positives. Looking forward, I think the big thing for Nigeria right now is whether it can in fact reach Vision 2020. Where are we and where are we headed?
Thank you very much. I think that the challenges in Nigeria are things that we look as opportunities. And I think that Vision 2020, we might not achieve the target, but we'll be very close to achieving the target. If you look at on the housing front, the challenges there, you have problems with the land tenure system, you have problems with building materials, which has impact on transportation, because if you take care of the transportation problems, you could have cheaper building materials, building cheaper houses. If you take care of the power problem, you could have cheaper building materials. If you take care of the fragmentation in the construction industry, you could have that, we could have bigger players in the market. So what I think is we have challenges that we need to focus on those challenges. But what you'd find is if we focus on the power problem and the transportation problem, we could significantly be solving a lot of the problems that we think we have today.
Well, Rotimi, just focusing on the electricity problem, because yes, we have a lot of issues when it comes to infrastructure and housing, but if you can sort out the electricity issue, then perhaps all the other issues will fall into place far quicker. According to the Financial Times today, electricity penetration in Nigeria is around 40%, and also interesting to note that electricity current capacity is enough to run about one vacuum cleaner for 25 inhabitants. It's a very scary scenario, and we also know it's contributing to the fact that it's very expensive to do business in Nigeria because of the use of generators. We know that there are plans in place to try and change this very difficult issue, but do you think it's happening quick enough?
I think it's been a focus of different governments, from the Obasanjo regime to the Yar'Adua regime, and I think what you'd find right now is that there is a roadmap. And what we're hoping is that the roadmap will be implemented. And frankly, what it tries to do is to move things away from the public sector to the private sector. We've seen examples of this in the telecoms area where things have moved, where the enabling environment has been put in place for the private sector to thrive. So I think if this happens, you could find that it could be a significant shift. One area, by the way, I need to caution is we need to look at the transmission, because I think that's one area where even if you generate, and even if you can distribute, if you can't transmit, then we could have a big challenge. So I think that whether the government or the private sector, they have to focus on the transmission, because I think it's the biggest challenge that we have.
Exactly, and whether we'd be working off a grid or using other technologies. Rotimi, but also just looking at potential private investors, because you said that perhaps is the way to go when it comes to electricity generation in Nigeria. We know that there have been various parties that have been interested from Saudi Arabia, Canada, Turkey, India, China, and a lot of interest from Europe, but it seems that a lot of people are hesitant because they're worried about the returns. What do you think is going to play out in this regard?
I think the government has to put in some incentives that would encourage private sector to come in. If you look at, again, I use the example of telecoms because this is one where we've seen how it's changed the landscape of Nigeria. And they had some incentives also at that time. So I think what we're going to find is there might be more incentives for the transmission and maybe less incentive for distribution. But I think whichever way, we need to have some incentives to encourage private sector investment, both locally and internationally, to come to Nigeria to take care of this challenge. This is a big challenge, and it's one where if we can crack it, it just opens up Nigeria significantly.
Well, oil revenues, and let's turn our attention to the petroleum industry. We know that oil accounts for around 80% of Nigeria's exports, and it has been one of those industries that has assisted Nigeria in putting money and allocating revenues in various key industries. One of the things that have come up is the natural gas scenario that is playing out, because it seems that untapped gas is around, and a quarter of the gas that we've been seeing as well from oil operations is currently being burnt. So a lot of wastage is occurring. What changes do you foresee happening in the next few years?
Frankly, again, I still see, private sector taking a leadership in this area. What you find today is you find a lot of the majors, the major companies in Nigeria, that's the major oil companies, still have, government, ownership. I think as soon as we can, privatize this government ownership, we could see a different scenario. Again, there needs to be some incentive. A lot of the gas could be used for power, to power, industries, and I think that we would find that this is what would happen eventually. We would have, government stepping out of the oil upstream and getting private sector involved, because again, today, government cannot even fund, its own contribution. And so, this sometimes slows down the activities of the major oil companies.
Well, a key thing
and you have marginal fields today, and you have local players also getting into the field. It's a lot of investment, but I think they're finding partners who have the technical skills, and it's easier to get the funding when you have the technical skills in place.
Well, Rotimi, you keep talking about privatization and getting the private sector involved, and you're alluding to all the incentives that government needs to start thinking about. Do you think that currently it's very difficult for multinational companies to enter Nigeria and head into these sectors, because there's still so much growth potential that I'm sure many foreign investors would be looking at Nigeria as an attractive investment destination? Do you think that there's just too much red tape?
I think the foreign investors, I think they understand risk and reward. And I think that the rewards that are there today are significant. You can take a look at it. Again, I like using the telecoms example because it's one that really shows what could happen. There were some players who didn't come in at the beginning because they thought Nigeria was almost like a landmine. And eventually, we've seen what happened to some of the operators who are here. And you've seen how several international operators have tried to come into Nigeria 5, 6 years after the train left the station. So I think this is the opportunity for people to come into Nigeria and to take care of these problems, because there's a first mover advantage. You get into Nigeria first, you're able to take care of the best locations that you can find. And I think at the end of it, that's what we're going to find. International investors would come in, because those who don't come in would have to pay a significant premium if they want to come in later.
Touching on the banking industry, we've seen a lot of things being shaken up over the past while, AMCON being created, that's still to be implemented. Give us your perspective on the banking industry, and there's been very big boom in the banking sector. Things are now, we're going to be seeing quite a bit of consolidation, Rotimi. So do you think we're on the right track?
I think we're on the right track. I think we've always been on the right track. We've derailed a bit. I think the consolidation of the industry, I think, was good for the market. I think you'll find we have bigger banks, stable banks. The challenges we had, I think, are challenges that are global. But I think what we need to do is just, consolidation and make sure that we do it the right way. I also think that it's also good for the capital markets, by the way, because what you find today, the banks actually account for 33% of the capital markets, as against 45% as of December of 2009. And I think if we can encourage more players to come into the capital markets, we could find that the impact of the banks will not have that much impact as it has today on the capital markets.
Rotimi, just to end off, the World Bank competitiveness report showed that Nigeria dropped by 28 positions and is now currently at 127. We also know that there's around 6 million people entering the job markets on a yearly basis. Growth for the first half of this year is said to be 7.4%. So clearly great prospects. As an investor in Nigeria and someone who lives in the country, how do you see Nigeria growing and being part of the world global economy?
Again, if I go back to this privatization and the resolution of the power problem, I think those are where we're going to have to focus on. It's going to take care of the unemployment. It's going to take care of the middle class, because one of the things that we don't have today is a middle class, or it's growing, but it's not significant. So I think we need to focus on a few of those problems: power, transportation, and it will take care of most of the problems that we see today.